The new professor. The crystalline spires of Centauri Academy pierced the rose-gold sky of Proxima, their surfaces refracting the light of the red dwarf sun into countless prismatic patterns. Professor Sarah Chen paused at the entrance to the xenobiology department, taking a moment to compose herself. After 15 years in Earth's Special Operations Command, she shouldn't feel nervous about teaching a class. Yet here she was, adjusting the collar of her regulation tunic for the third time. The real challenge wasn't the teaching itself. It was maintaining her cover while doing it. The Academy's board had hired her based on her impressive academic credentials and research experience. Carefully crafted backstory elements that obscured her true background in military xenobiology and combat operations. They didn't need to know that she had spent more time studying alien physiology in the field than in any laboratory. As she approached her classroom, the cacophony of multiple species in conversation reached her ears. The massive lecture hall housed over 200 students from across the Galactic Alliance. Towering Arcturians with their iridescent scales lounged in specially designed seats. Crystalline Regellians clustered together, their faceted bodies chiming softly as they communicated. And scattered throughout, looking almost lost among their more exotic classmates, were the human students. Sarah's enhanced hearing, courtesy of military biotech that wasn't exactly legal in civilian life, picked up snippets of conversation. Another human professor. The dean must be getting desperate. I heard they're required to hire a certain quota of primitives now. At least it's just xenobiology. Not like they could handle teaching quantum mechanics. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she activated the room's holoprojector. Let them underestimate her. It wouldn't be the first time, and like always, she would use it to her advantage. "Good morning, class," she said, her voice carrying easily across the amphitheater. "I'm Professor Chen, and this is Advanced Xenobiology 401. The casual conversations died down as attention turned to her. She noted the dismissive glances, the barely concealed sneers from certain students, particularly from a group of Arcturians near the back, led by a male whose scales rippled with patterns indicating high social status. "Before we begin, I'd like to address something I'm sure many of you are thinking." She paused, making eye contact with several of the more obviously disdainful students. "Yes, I'm human. And yes, I'm qualified to teach this course. In fact, I would argue that humans have a unique perspective on xenobiology that many of you might find enlightening." The Arcturian leader's scales flashed in a pattern of derision. Enlightening. Humans have barely been spacefaring for 2 centuries. Some of us have family histories in xenobiology that span millennia. "Ah, you must be Cranax," Sarah said, consulting her student roster with deliberate casualness. "From the distinguished house of Vixtal. Your family's work on comparative cardiovascular systems is well known." She saw his scales ripple with pride before adding, "Though I noted several crucial errors in their latest publication regarding human adaptability. Would you like to discuss those now?" The Arcturian's scales flushed dark with embarrassment as several of his classmates chittered in amusement. Sarah didn't wait for his response, instead launching into her lecture on convergent evolution across sapient species. She kept her delivery engaging but professional, expertly weaving in practical examples that drew from her field experience without revealing their true source. As the class progressed, she noticed something interesting. While some of the alien students maintained their air of superiority, others began showing genuine interest, particularly when she explained how humans had adapted various alien technologies to compensate for their supposed primitive biology. "Consider the Regellian neural interface," she said, pulling up a holographic diagram. "Initially, it was thought humans could never use such technology due to our simple nervous systems. But by studying how different species interface with it, human scientists developed a hybrid system that actually improves on the original design. Now it's the standard model used across the Alliance." A Regellian student's crystalline form hummed with curiosity. "Is that why the latest interfaces are more efficient? Because they were redesigned for human limitations?" "Exactly. Sarah replied. Sometimes limitations breed innovation. Which brings us to your first assignment. The class groaned collectively. Some things were universal across species, as she outlined a project analyzing how different species had overcome their evolutionary constraints. She deliberately assigned mixed species groups, knowing it would cause tension but seeing it as necessary. As the students filed out after class, Sarah noticed the human pupils lingering, gathering their courage. Finally, one of them approached her desk. "Professor," the young woman said, her voice quiet but determined. "I'm Maya Santos. We just wanted to say thank you for not being apologetic about being human." Sarah studied Maya and the small group behind her. She saw in their eyes something she recognized, the weight of constantly being underestimated, of having to prove themselves worthy of even being in the room. She had seen the same look in her soldiers' eyes before missions against technologically superior opponents. "There's nothing to apologize for," Sarah replied firmly. "Humanity's greatest strength isn't our biology or our technology. It's our ability to adapt, to find unexpected solutions, to turn our weaknesses into advantages. Remember that." After the students left, Sarah began preparing for her next class. Through the window, she could see Cranax and his group of Arcturians gathering in the courtyard, their scale patterns indicating agitation as they gestured toward the xenobiology building. Her enhanced hearing picked up fragments of their conversation, something about putting the primitive in her place. She smiled to herself. Let them try. They had no idea what they were dealing with, and she had no intention of enlightening them. Not yet, anyway. Sometimes the best lessons came from making mistakes, and she had a feeling these students were about to get quite an education. As she watched them disperse, Sarah's tactical mind was already analyzing patterns, identifying potential troublemakers and allies, mapping out the complex social dynamics at play. She hadn't expected her teaching position to turn into a strategic operation, but that's exactly what it was becoming. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had taken this job to escape her military past, only to find herself planning for a different kind of conflict. But this time, the stakes were different. This wasn't about military objectives or planetary security. It was about something more fundamental: the right of her species to be treated as equals, to be judged on their merits rather than their evolutionary history. And if some of her students needed a practical demonstration of human capabilities to learn that lesson, well, she was more than qualified to provide one. The red dwarf sun cast long shadows across the campus as Sarah finally left her office. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to bridge the gap between species, or widen it, depending on how certain students chose to behave. Either way, she would be ready. After all, adaptation wasn't just a subject she taught. It was the story of her species and her own personal survival strategy. And if anyone thought they could bully her or her human students into submission, they were about to learn why humanity had survived and thrived against all odds in a galaxy that had initially dismissed them as primitives. Sometimes the best teachers were those who had learned the hardest lessons themselves, and Sarah Chen had learned more than enough to give these aliens an education they would never forget. Rising tensions. The Academy's annual Xenoscience exhibition was approaching, and Sarah Chen could feel the undercurrent of anxiety rippling through her human students. 3 weeks had passed since her first class, and while the overt hostility had somewhat subsided, it had been replaced by something more insidious. She discovered the first sabotaged experiment while doing her evening rounds. The neural mapping project that Maya Santos and her team had been working on for 2 weeks was showing impossible readings. Sarah's enhanced vision caught the subtle signs of tampering, micropunctures in the quantum gel medium that would have been invisible to standard scanners. "Clever," she muttered, carefully extracting the sample for analysis. The saboteur had known exactly where to strike, using techniques that suggested advanced knowledge of xenobiology. Her military training kicked in automatically, analyzing the evidence with cold precision. The damage was precise, professional, and distinctly Arcturian in methodology. The next morning, she called Maya's team to her office. The human students looked defeated before she even spoke, but Sarah had no intention of letting this setback stand. "Your project wasn't a failure," she said, activating a holographic display of their damaged experiment. "It was attacked. And in being attacked, it's given us valuable data." She zoomed in on the sabotaged sections. "What do you see?" Maya leaned forward, her dark eyes narrowing. "The damage. It's too precise to be random." "Exactly. And what does that tell us about our saboteur?" Another student, James Chen, no relation, spoke up. "They're afraid. If our project was really worthless, they wouldn't have bothered." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Now you're thinking like scientists, and like survivors. Every attempt to dismiss or diminish you is data. Use it." The students left with renewed determination, but Sarah's satisfaction was short-lived. That afternoon, she received a message from Dean Vixelara, an elderly Arcturian whose scales had long since faded to a distinguished silver. "Professor Chen," the dean's hologram flickered with concern, "there are complaints about your teaching methods. Some students feel you're showing inappropriate bias toward human perspectives." Sarah had expected this. "I assume these complaints come from Cranax and his cohort. Among others, they've submitted a formal request for academic review. They claim your class fails to properly acknowledge the superior achievements of established xenobiological traditions." Interesting. Sarah pulled up her class data on her tablet. "Have they included my latest test results in their complaint, where the human students outperformed their peers in practical application scenarios?" The dean's scales rippled with discomfort. "Professor Chen, you must understand the political delicacy of this situation. The Vixtel family provides significant funding to the Academy." "I understand perfectly, Dean, which is why I've documented every instance of academic sabotage, every accident that has targeted human students since I arrived." Sarah's voice remained professional, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. "I'm sure the Academy Board would be very interested in that data, should an academic review become necessary." The dean's scales flashed with alarm before settling into a pattern of resigned acknowledgement. "I see you've learned to play our games, Professor." "On the contrary, Dean, I'm just very good at pattern recognition. It's a human trait." After the dean's hologram flickered out, Sarah leaned back in her chair, reviewing her options. The sabotage was escalating, and while she could protect her students from academic attacks, she worried about more direct confrontations. Her military instincts were screaming that something bigger was coming. She wasn't wrong. The next day, during the practical laboratory session, a Rigelian crystalline matrix accidentally destabilized near a group of human students. If Sarah hadn't noticed the telltale frequency shift and shouted a warning, 3 students would have been caught in the quantum cascade. As she helped evacuate the lab, she caught sight of Cranax and his group watching from the doorway. His scales weren't showing fear or shock at the near disaster. They showed disappointment. That night, Sarah sent a coded message to an old contact in Earth's diplomatic corps. She needed information about the Vixtel family that wouldn't be in public databases. While she waited for a response, she modified her teaching plans. If they wanted to escalate, she would oblige them, but on her terms. Today, she announced to her class the following morning, "We're going to discuss xenobiological warfare, specifically how different species have evolved defenses against biological and technological attacks." She noted how Cranax and his allies suddenly paid much closer attention. "We'll start with a practical demonstration." She activated the lab's environmental controls, causing the room's temperature and gravity to fluctuate randomly. Most of the alien students immediately struggled to adjust. Their bodies adapted to stable conditions. The human students, however, barely seemed to notice. "Humans evolved on a planet with highly variable conditions," Sarah explained calmly as her alien students struggled to compensate. "Temperature swings, gravity variations due to latitude, atmospheric pressure changes. Our bodies learn to adapt quickly. It's not a weakness. It's a survival mechanism." She stabilized the environment, letting her point sink in. Your homework is to research how your own species' evolutionary advantages might become disadvantages in certain situations. And yes, this will be on the examination. After class, she received the encrypted response from her contact. The data confirmed her suspicions. The Vixtel family's prominence was built on more than just academic achievements. They had a history of eliminating competition, both academic and otherwise, through increasingly aggressive means. Sarah began preparing countermeasures, drawing on both her military experience and academic knowledge. She upgraded the security on her students' projects, installed subtle monitoring devices in the laboratories, and began teaching her human students techniques for identifying and countering sabotage, all under the guise of standard xenobiology practices. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. The Vixtel reputation was at stake now, and they wouldn't stop at simple sabotage. They would keep pushing until they got a response, hoping to prove their superiority once and for all. Looking out over the campus as sunset painted the crystalline buildings in shades of blood red, Sarah made her decision. She would give them exactly what they wanted, a chance to prove their superiority. But first, she needed to ensure her students were ready for what was coming. Because this wasn't just about grades or academic standing anymore. This was about survival, adaptation, and proving that humanity's place among the stars wasn't just a quirk of history or a political courtesy. It was earned through blood, sweat, and an unwavering refusal to accept the limitations others tried to impose on them. The real lesson was about to begin, and Sarah intended to make it one the Academy would never forget. Breaking point. The Xenoscience exhibition was 3 days away when Sarah's security algorithms detected an unauthorized access to the quarantine labs. At 3 in the morning, campus time, someone had bypassed the biosecurity protocols and accessed the containment units holding some of the most dangerous specimens in the Academy's collection. Sarah was already in motion, her body responding to the alert before her conscious mind fully processed it. 15 years of special operations training didn't disappear just because you changed careers. She moved through the darkened corridors like a shadow, her enhanced vision turning the low light into crystal clarity. The quarantine lab's main door showed no signs of forced entry. Someone had used valid credentials. Sarah's jaw tightened as she accessed the security feed through her neural interface, another piece of discontinued military tech she kept from her previous life. The camera footage had been looped, but they hadn't known about her backup systems. Inside, she heard the soft chime of Rigelian communication and the distinctive rustling of Arcturian scales. As she approached the inner chamber, voices became clear. "The dispersal system is set," a crystalline voice chimed. "Once activated, the modified pathogens will target only human protein structures." "Excellent." Sarah recognized Cranax's voice. "During the exhibition, their precious projects will fail as they succumb to the symptoms. Nothing fatal, of course, just enough to prove how unsuited they are for serious academic work. Their inherent biological weakness will be impossible to ignore." Sarah had heard enough. She triggered the lab's containment protocols, sealing all exits. Emergency lights flooded the chamber with harsh blue illumination, revealing Cranax, 2 other Arcturians, and a Rigelian student clustered around the central specimen storage unit. "That's an interesting hypothesis you're testing," Sarah said, stepping into view. "But your methodology is flawed." The students spun to face her. Cranax's scales rippled with shock before settling into aggressive patterns. "Professor Chen, this is unfortunate. I assume you understand that your word against the heir of House Vixtel will carry little weight. Bold of you to assume I plan to rely on words." Sarah's voice was calm as she initiated a neural broadcast to the Academy's security systems. Everything happening in the lab was being recorded and transmitted to multiple secure locations. "You know what fascinates me about beings who believe in their natural superiority? They rarely bother to research their supposed inferiors thoroughly." She began moving, her stance fluid and relaxed in a way that set off ancient predatory warning signals in the Arcturians' hindbrains. Their scales flickered with unconscious fear patterns. "For instance," she continued, Did you research why humans achieved spaceflight so quickly after their industrial revolution? How they went from atmospheric aircraft to interstellar ships in less than 2 centuries? The Rigelian student moved to access a control panel. Sarah's hand blurred, and suddenly a small device was attached to their crystalline surface, disrupting their ability to interface with technology. "We adapted," Sarah said, her movement so quick none of them had seen it clearly. "We took every piece of technology we encountered and improved it, made it work for us. Like this neural disruptor, originally Rigelian technology, but modified by humans for enhanced efficiency." Cranax's scales were now showing clear distress patterns, but his voice remained arrogant. "You're proving our point, primitive. You can only copy and modify. You can't truly innovate." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing off the laboratory walls. "Copy and modify. Let me share some context about my previous career before I became a professor." She touched her neural interface, and the lab's displays came to life, showing classified military records. Her records. Commander Sarah Chen, Earth Special Operations, Xenobiology Warfare Division, specialized in countering biological and technological weapons from advanced species. The reason humans advanced so quickly in space, we had to. The galaxy isn't as empty as most students are taught, and not every advanced species was interested in peaceful contact. The Arcturians were backing away now, their scales showing pure fear. The Rigelian had gone completely still, their crystalline surface dulled with shock. "I didn't take this teaching position because I wanted to retire," Sarah continued, still moving with that predatory grace. "I took it because humanity noticed a pattern of increasing anti-human sentiment in elite academic institutions. Sentiment that was shaping the next generation of political and scientific leaders. We decided that needed to change." Cranax found his voice. You're a spy. I prefer cultural adjustment specialist, and you've just given me exactly what I needed to force some significant adjustments to the Academy's policies." She gestured to the evidence of their attempted biological attack. "Now, we have 2 options. First option, I arrest you all for attempted biological terrorism. Your families are disgraced, and humanity gains significant political leverage in the Academy's governance." She let that sink in before continuing. "Second option, you learn from this experience. You take the time to actually study human history, not the sanitized version in your textbooks, but the real history of how we survived and thrived in a hostile galaxy. You learn why underestimating humans is a potentially fatal mistake, and you help change the culture of this institution from within." The lad was silent except for the soft hum of containment fields. Sarah could see the calculations happening behind Cranax's eyes, his ingrained arrogance warring with his survival instincts. "How do we know you won't use this against us anyway?" he finally asked. "Because humans understand something your people seem to have forgotten. True strength isn't about dominating others. It's about having the power to do so and choosing not to. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to be respected as equals." She deactivated the containment protocols. "You have until the end of the exhibition to decide. Choose wisely." Dismissed. As the students fled the lab, Sarah began methodically gathering evidence and securing the modified pathogens. She had given them a chance at redemption, but she wasn't naive. Her report to Earth Command would be detailed and comprehensive. One way or another, this incident would mark a turning point in human-alien relations at the Academy. The real question was whether it would be remembered as the beginning of genuine understanding between species, or as the first shot in a very different kind of academic conflict. Either way, Sarah knew one thing for certain. After tonight, no one at the Academy would ever underestimate humans again. Revelations and repercussions. News spread through the Academy like a quantum cascade. Not the full truth. Sarah's evidence remained secured away. But enough. Whispers of what happened in the quarantine lab transformed into rumors, then into stories that grew with each telling. The human professor who moved faster than sight. The failed attack. The choice she offered. Sarah watched it all unfold with tactical precision, noting how the social dynamics shifted like gravity waves around a stellar collision. Her human students walked taller now, their confidence bolstered by the changing atmosphere. But it was the alien students' reactions that truly interested her. They arrived in her office in ones and twos at first, a Rigelian crystalline entity vibrating with curiosity about human military applications of their technology. An Arcturian junior whose scales showed genuine contrition, asking about the true history of human space exploration. Each conversation was an opportunity, and Sarah seized them all. The mistake, she told a group of particularly attentive students during an impromptu evening lecture, was assuming that human technological development followed the same patterns as other species. We didn't have millennia of gradual advancement. We had to sprint. She brought up a classified star chart, showing first contact incidents that had never made it into official histories. When we reached for the stars, we found out we weren't alone. And not everyone was friendly. We had to adapt or die. So we did what humans do best. We learned, we modified, we survived. The dean's office contacted her again, but this time the message was different. The Board of Governors wanted a full presentation on human educational methodologies. Sarah smiled as she read the carefully worded request. The Academy was adapting too. But Cranax and his core group remained ominously quiet. Sarah's surveillance systems tracked them meeting in secret locations, their conversations shielded by high-grade privacy fields that spoke of serious family connections. They were planning something. The only question was what. The answer came 3 days before the exhibition, delivered by Maya Santos during an evening lab session. "Professor," Maya said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "they're challenging the validity of all human research at the Academy. Not just current projects. Everything. Every paper, every thesis, every breakthrough for the past 20 years. Sarah's expression didn't change as she reviewed the formal challenge on her tablet. It was cleverly done. By questioning the fundamental methodology of human research, Cranax's group had forced a full review. If successful, it would set human academics standing back decades. "They're trying to beat us at our own game," James Chin added, his fingers nervously tapping his desk, "using academic regulations instead of direct confrontation." "Good," Sarah said, surprising them all. "They're learning. Finally." She stood, addressing the gathered human students. "This is what adaptation looks like. They've analyzed their previous failures and developed a new strategy. Now it's our turn to show them what human adaptation really means." Over the next 72 hours, Sarah's office became a command center for an academic counteroffensive. She called in favors from contacts across the galaxy, assembling a comprehensive defense of human research methodologies. Her students worked tirelessly, drawing connections between human innovations and advancements in every field. But Sarah had one more card to play. On the morning of the exhibition, she submitted her own challenge, a proposal to revolutionize how xenobiology was taught at the Academy. "The current curriculum," she wrote, "reflects an outdated model of species development. I propose a new framework based on adaptive potential rather than evolutionary age, and I offer myself as a test subject." The Board of Governors convened an emergency session. Sarah stood before them, calm and composed, as she laid out her challenge. "I will demonstrate, through practical example, how human adaptability can overcome any species-specific advantage. Choose your champions, set your tests. Let's settle this question of capability once and for all." The Arcturian governor's scales flickered with interest. The Rigelian representatives chimed in harmonic patterns of curiosity, and in the back of the chamber, Sarah spotted Cranax and his group, their expressions unreadable. "You understand," the dean said carefully, "that if you fail, it will validate every criticism of human academic participation. And if I succeed," Sarah countered, "it will prove that humanity's place here isn't just political courtesy. It's earned." The challenge was accepted. The exhibition would be transformed into a series of tests, physical, mental, and academic. Champions from each major species would compete against Sarah in their areas of natural advantage. As she left the chamber, Sarah found Maya and James waiting anxiously. "Professor," Maya started, "you're not just risking your own standing. You're gambling with the future of every human at the Academy." Sarah's smile held centuries of human determination. No pressure then. She checked her neural interface, reviewing the preliminary test parameters. Besides, they're still making the same fundamental mistake. "What's that?" James asked. "They think this is about proving human equality." "It's not." Sarah's eyes held the same predatory gleam they'd shown in the quarantine lab. "It's about showing them why humanity's greatest strength isn't our ability to match other species' advantages. It's our ability to turn their advantages against them." As she walked away, Sarah's mind was already racing through scenarios, planning contingencies, preparing for what would be the most important demonstration of her career. The academic board thought they were testing human capabilities. In reality, she was about to teach them all a lesson about the true meaning of adaptation. And somewhere in the back of her mind, the tactical systems she'd never fully disconnected were spinning up, ready for one more operation. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about academic standing or political power. This was about survival, the very thing humans had always excelled at. The exhibition would begin tomorrow, and Sarah Chen, professor, soldier, and humanity's unlikely champion, would show the galaxy exactly why underestimating humans was the last mistake any species should make. The demonstration. The Academy's Grand Exhibition Hall had been transformed overnight. What was normally a space for academic presentations now resembled a combination of athletic arena, scientific laboratory, and tactical simulation chamber. The tiered seating was packed with students and faculty from every species, their attention focused on the central platform where Sarah Chen stood calmly. "The trials will test physical capability, academic knowledge, tactical thinking, and adaptive response," Dean Vexilera announced, her scales shimmering with formal patterns. "Each challenge will be administered by specialists in their respective fields. Professor Chen will face experts from 4 different species, each demonstrating their natural advantages." Sarah noted Cranax in the front row, his scales showing a complex pattern of anticipation and uncertainty. Her human students were clustered together, Maya and James at their center, watching with barely contained nervousness. The first challenge came from the Regellians. Their crystalline champion interfaced directly with the Hall's computational systems, creating a multidimensional puzzle of quantum mechanics that would take most organic brains days to process. Sarah smiled. They'd played right into her hands with the first test. "Interesting approach," she said, activating her neural interface. "But you've made an assumption about human processing capabilities." Her fingers danced through the air, manipulating the holographic display. "We don't just use technology. We integrate with it, adapt it, improve it." The quantum puzzle resolved in minutes, restructured using principles that made the Regellian judge's crystalline surface vibrate with surprise. Sarah hadn't just solved the puzzle. She'd optimized it, finding solutions the original designers hadn't considered. The Arcturian challenge focused on physical capability. Their champion, a towering figure with combat-modified scales, set up a series of obstacles under varying environmental conditions. "Let's see how your primitive biology handles extreme adaptation," he rumbled. Sarah's response was to remove her professor's tunic, revealing a form-fitting combat suit underneath. "Human technology, inspired by Arcturian biology," she explained, "but with improvements." The suit rippled, adapting to each environmental change faster than natural scales could respond. She moved through the obstacle course like water flowing around rocks, her enhanced reflexes and modified nervous system, turning what should have been an impossible challenge into a display of human ingenuity. The Arcturian judge's scales showed clear disbelief as she completed the course in record time. The third challenge came from the Neuraxians, psychic entities who prided themselves on their superior cognitive processing. Their champion created a complex strategic simulation, a multidimensional chess game that required managing hundreds of pieces across parallel realities. Pattern recognition, Sarah said as she sat before the game board, is a human specialty. We evolved as persistence hunters, tracking prey across vast distances by identifying and predicting patterns. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. The same skills that let us track animals let us map stars, predict quantum behavior, and yes, understand multidimensional strategy. The game lasted hours, but its conclusion was decisive. Sarah's victory came not from superior processing power, but from her ability to identify and exploit patterns the Neuraxian hadn't even recognized they were creating. The final challenge was presented by Cranax himself. A test of pure xenobiological knowledge, he announced. No technology, no physical advantages, just understanding of life itself. Sarah inclined her head in acknowledgement. This was what it had all been building to, not just a test of knowledge, but a chance for understanding. The challenge involved analyzing and adapting to an unknown biological agent, one that could theoretically affect any species. As Sarah worked, she began to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. The interesting thing about humans, she said, manipulating complex molecular structures with practiced ease, isn't our physical capabilities or our technology or even our intelligence. It's our perspective. Her hands never stopped moving as she continued. We look at other species' advantages, Arcturian environmental adaptation, Rigelian computational processing, Neuraxian pattern recognition, and we don't just admire them. We don't just copy them. We understand them, integrate them, improve them. The solution she presented wasn't just effective, it was elegant. She had created a universal adaptation protocol that could protect any species from the biological agent, using principles borrowed from every major species' immune systems. This, she said, gesturing to her solution, is human innovation. We take the best from everyone, combine it in ways no one expected, and create something new, something better. The hall was silent as the judges conferred. Finally, Dean Vexilera stepped forward, her scales showing patterns Sarah had never seen before, respect tinged with awe. Professor Chen has not merely passed these trials, the dean announced. She has demonstrated why human adaptation and innovation deserve their place in our institution. The challenge to human research methodologies is hereby dismissed. But Sarah wasn't finished. She turned to address the assembled students directly. Everything you've seen today, every adaptation, every solution, every innovation, came from studying and understanding each other. Humanity's greatest strength isn't that we can outcompete you, it's that we can learn from you, work with you, combine the best of all our abilities to create something greater than any one species could achieve alone. She looked directly at Cranax as she continued. That's the real lesson here. Not that humans are superior or inferior, but that true progress comes from cooperation, not competition. From understanding our differences and using them to make all of us better. The impact was immediate and profound. Students of all species began discussing the implications, their previous divisions forgotten in the excitement of new possibilities. Even Cranax's scales showed patterns of deep thought rather than his usual arrogance. Maya and James led the human students in celebration, but Sarah noticed something more significant. Alien students were joining them, asking questions, offering congratulations, beginning the kind of exchange of ideas she had hoped to inspire. Later that evening, as the red dwarf sun set behind the Academy's crystalline spires, Sarah stood in her office preparing her report to Earth Command. The operation had been a success, but not in the way they might have expected. She hadn't just defended humanity's position. She had opened the door to genuine collaboration between species. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Cranax, his scales showing formal patterns of respect. "Professor," he said carefully, "I find myself reconsidering many things. Would you be willing to tell me more about human history? The real history?" Sarah smiled. This, she knew, was how real change began. not with grand demonstrations or formal challenges, but with curiosity and a willingness to learn. "Take a seat," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Let me tell you about the first time humans encountered a species that thought we were primitive." As she began her story, Sarah knew that the real work was just beginning. But for the first time since she'd arrived at the academy, she felt truly hopeful about the future. Sometimes the best way to prove your worth wasn't by showing how strong you were, but by showing how much stronger everyone could become together. The age of true cooperation between species had begun, and it had started not with a bang or a whimper, but with a lesson about the true nature of human adaptability, and the wisdom to use that adaptability not for dominance, but for progress.